This song was the first one out of this record on which I actually felt that I was listening to old Guns N' Roses. Hello there, girls and boys! Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Chinese Democracy, because we're finally coming back to it. This time around, the first time that we listen to one of the tracks from this album on this particular room here at the studio. So the track in question is the one that you've been asking for so long, Catcher in the Rye. And this track, yeah, it's quite cool. Again, coming from a place of actually appreciating this album for what it is, and I hope you enjoy the track as well as much as I do, and also, well, we can find some common ground, and if not, please let me know what you think about my opinions on this track while I analyze it by your side here on this channel. So, if this is your jam, let's get into it. But before we go, if this is your first time channel, I welcome you, because here we analyze the music that we love from the perspective of an active musician and professional music producer, using language that everybody can understand, in a way to expand our knowledge when it comes to music production, songwriting, and of course, music appreciation. So, if this is your jam, let's rock and roll. Here we go. So here we go, girls and boys. Catcher in the Rye by Guns N' Roses. Okay, how about that? This song has plenty of kind of progressive rock elements to it, don't you think? The third thing started off with a very fantastic and quite cool use of the vocals, because I was trying to point out that how far the sound of his vocals sounded like at the very beginning. I mean, the very introduction of the track, because you got this kind of super reverby effect on the vocals, and reverb is the effect that we use to recreate the sound of a particular ambience. The thing is that in this case, rather than using it as a way to convey the sensation or give them the feel that he's singing inside of a cathedral, for example, they actually overloaded the sound of his vocals with it, giving us as a result something like this. Right? What I did there is actually mostly what you heard was the reverb itself. When you're working with this kind of effects, you have control over the mix between the dry sound, which is the sound coming in, the vocals in this case, and the wet sound, which is, of course, the effect in question. And they use that effect throughout some of the tiny passages in which he was singing at the very introduction of the song, for it to be removed little by little, for it to bring us inside of the first verse. Quite cool. That was actually very, very surprising, because it's been a while since I listened to this track. Now, speaking of the first time that I listened to this track, sorry about that, girls and boys. This song was the first one out of this record on which I actually felt that I was listening to old Guns N' Roses. To my ears, and even to this day, I still think that this track is the one that sounds the closest to the original sound Guns N' Roses used to produce back in the 90s. And for those of you who don't know, this record is very controversial because, well, the only band member that was originally part of Guns N' Roses was, at this stage at least, Axel. The rest are plenty of musicians. And speaking of which, as usual, please tell me who is playing which and what in this particular track, because the lineup of this album is insane. It's just the best of the best in the business, and yeah, it's fantastic. Now, the question is this. Do you think that this song in particular, after me saying that this is the closest Guns N' Roses ever got from the Chinese Democracy era to sound like they used to do back in the Use Your Illusion, for example, or Appetite for Destruction? In my opinion, it is. But I would love to see if you think differently or the same way as I do, and the why, of course. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Now, one thing that I, not necessarily speaking, happen to be quite a fan of this particular track, because for the vast majority of the time, I love the sound of this album, even though it's a little bit too loud. It's not that loud. The sound of the vocals are a little bit too overcompressed in this one. What is compression? Compression is a device that we use, well, a compressor is a device that we use to control the dynamic range of a given track. In this case, we're going to be talking about the vocals. And as you have somewhere on the screen, the way that vocals are recorded, they tend to develop this kind of spiky shape. Those spikes represent the points of volume of each of the different notes or sounds produced by the human voice, or any recording for that matter. The thing is that, as you can see, they are quite varied in nature depending on how you're speaking. And actually, the one that you got in front of you is actually my own recording of me speaking at this very moment. So, the point is this. When you're using a compressor, you're trying to even out the differences between the lowest point in volume with the highest point in volume, thus creating a much more stable and kind of controlled, for lack of a better term, sound, which tends to be quite pleasant to the ears, particularly when dealing with recorded music. Now, you can overdo it as well. The same what happens with reverb, as the first example we mentioned. You can overdo it and make the sound of the effect quite noticeable. This is the first time in this album that I actually felt that the approach to the compression on the vocals is a little bit too much. It's something that requires years of training to detect, okay? And it's because I do this for a living, okay? But if you pay attention, you will notice how kind of there is something going on in certain points of his performance, particularly because he's singing quite loudly. I can hear it even from here. And also, the pitch of the vocals requires him to go super loud. By the way, he's singing amazingly well. That's a fact. Not necessarily speaking the biggest fan of his vocal style, but damn it, he's very good. He's very good. And it's a perfect fit for Guns N' Roses music. I'm going to go back to the mix, and I'm going to be discussing the sound of the track, overall sound, later on, because it's time to hit the music once again. Now, I will like you to pay attention to the sound of his vocals and try to find those the artifacts I'm trying to refer to when it comes to the compression, and also see if you can detect the use of certain reverb or certain amounts of reverb on the rest of the instrumentation, because, let's continue. Here we go. Okay, girls and boys, it was hard for me to find a place for this song to stop because this actually it's so good, right? And also quite once again prog rocky. The whole structure of the track is morphing the whole time. This is one of the least repetitive songs by Guns N' Roses ever, in my opinion. And I'm not saying repetitive as something bad. It's simply, you know what I mean. Songs tend to have this kind of symmetrical pattern that makes them sound musical, and most of the time we enjoy that kind of music. That's why we got progressive rock or progressive music in general, because, well, the whole point of it is developing throughout time rather than repeating itself. Whatever, I digress. Coming back to the track itself, did you catch the use of reverb on other instruments? The snare, for example. This is a track that the use of those spaces are done in such a good taste because it's not gigantic. It feels it feels right. And as you can imagine, the use of reverb allows for the instruments to feel a bit bigger, larger than life, because you already understand that it's creating the sense of space, right? And in our heads, for whatever reason, the longer the release tail, the sound that it's held by the reverb itself, is the bigger and the more impactful that sound, for whatever reason, becomes in our heads. That's how we understand it. It's not necessarily real, but you get my point. And in this case, the snare, particularly speaking, and the drums as a whole, they don't have that sound, right? They're like quite rhythmical and just filling in the gaps, because the drumming in this track is not necessarily speaking that flashing. It's very musical, keeping it bare bones, but serving the track rather than serving himself. By the way, tell me who's the drummer for this one, because excellent. The tone of the drums is just great. Now, speaking of tone, let's talk about the guitar as well, because the guitar tone in that solo was amazing, so cool, and it's the closest again to the, when it comes to style, to the way Slash wrote his parts for the old Guns N' Roses records. Maybe that's the reason why I felt the first time I listened to this track that this is the closest we ever got to classic Guns N' Roses. But I digress. Please tell me who's playing the guitar in this one. Now, let's take a look at the screen because it's time to analyze the mix. First of you, girls and boys, we got Decibel, the tool that we use to analyze the sound that we're listening to, the music that we're listening to, through the use of a visual medium. Over there, the first analyzer that we're going to be analyzing with our eyes, of course, is going to be the frequency range analyzer. Over here, we got this white line that represents the loudest points of each of the frequencies that comprises the human hearing range, all the way from 20 to all the way down to 20,000 hertz. And not surprising at all, this is a very even sounding mix. Yeah, you heard it right, because usually we get a bump. And coming from Chinese Democracy, I was expecting a little bit of a higher bump over here in the lows, because this is a very bombastic sounding album in general. I have many times reference to this track while doing some other examples, some other analysis, of this album being kind of very punchy, very modern, and kind of close to being way too loud, yet retaining dynamic range, more on that later, but also quite a lot of musicality to it. It's kind of like the sweet spot, or not sweet spot, I think it's the closest we can get to the sound before getting burnt, if that makes sense to you, when it comes to loudness and way too overly produced records. And in here, yeah, this is super controlled. The track itself is very dense, the mix itself is very dense, because we have dealt with many instruments. We have dealt with, of course, the drums, the bass, the guitars, piano, strings, synthesizers at certain points, sound effects, all sorts of things. And still the sound of the music is quite clear to us. Still, again, it's this thing that is playing way too close to the sun. It's way too dangerous. Let me try to rephrase this. This mix, I find it quite interesting because of how everything is pushed to every extreme possible. Pay attention to the sound of the instruments, particularly the drum kit. It feels super big, super processed, but still somehow it feels organic. The same happens to the guitars. The guitar tone, for example, the one I referred to, it was so tasteful. Of course, the playing helped a lot, but I hope it makes sense to you. Very well defined and not harsh at all. And coming back to the screen, you can see that it's clear. We don't have that huge bump on the mid highs to highs. And that's where we would have found some form of harshness. But this being quite clean and almost to the point of being clinical to a certain degree, don't you think? The sound, I mean, is way too precise. Everything sounds super clearly. Such a great mix. Such a great mix. And well, I can tell that they put all sorts of efforts and time on just to get to this result. Wow, it's impressive. Now, taking a look at the second section of our analyzer, we got the dynamic range analyzer, which is what we use to take a look at the different points in volume across time of any given track. This blue blob represents the volume increases or decreases across time. And the beginning, the introduction was super low, but let me show you how slowly but surely the ramp up of volume becomes the closer we get to the point on which the whole band is introduced. This is where the drums kicked in. And you can see that there is a huge bump. That's where the first kick hit, boom. And then it goes a little bit lower. Very clever. They did that because they made, by pushing the volume of that particular point and the introduction of the drums a little bit, because it made it feel more impactful. That's great, because the more impactful it is, the more exciting it becomes. And this being the very introduction of the track allows for the track to catch everybody's attention. From here onwards, you can see that they lower it a little bit for it to ramp up little by little as every single of the different instruments are or becomes part of the song and the arrangement. And here you see that we reach the fantastic and super loud first chorus. But look, this is the important part. We can know which part is which just by the amount of volume of each of those. Super important, and it's something that I will always put so much stress on, because that's how you can create emotion while mixing, just by pushing the faders at different rates. Volume, for whatever reason, it's always understood by our human brains as emotion, because the quieter a signal it is, the more intimate and closer to us it feels. The louder it gets, the more exciting and bombastic it becomes. So by playing with both of those correctly, we can actually deliver more messages, not just by the way this song is written. And as a mixer myself, you are always aiming to do this because you are trying to project the emotion that the artist is trying to do with the way the song is crafted. Very, very important thing to do. And, well, marvelously done here. It's incredible. This mix is very, 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 very processed, as I mentioned before, but it still retains this super clever use of a dynamic range. And look at this. I'm going to take you back to the first chorus. I'm going to hold my mouse where it is right now, the highest point it got, and see. We don't even reach that point back, even though the song went through that particular beautiful intersection passage. We haven't got that loud yet. Cool, right? This is where they did the sing-along section, clearly. And then you see the rest of the section of the song progressing, but we haven't reached the peak volume. Great. Because they're preparing us for the grand finale. Speaking of which, let's get to it. Here we go.
Play
Just as I said, look at this. The song is just ramping up, ramping up, ramping up in volume for it to reach the climax that was the ending. Now, did you pay attention to what I was trying to point out while the song was playing? The sound of his vocals went bananas. They pushed them super to the front. They were louder than before. But at the same time, they removed a lot of the effects that made the sound of his vocals sound the way they did while this whole track was playing. It became super dry, using the terminology that I introduced to you at the beginning of this video. Why? When you do that, the way that you understand the sound, or at least the effect that it has on us, the listeners of the track, is that they are super close to us. It's basically here, like screaming at us just by being by our sides. Very intelligent, and that's much closer to sound design rather than mixing. But you can see what I'm trying to tell you, right? Is the use of the tools and the techniques to convey a certain emotional reaction on our audience. And did it succeed? I don't know. Let me know. In my book, I felt, maybe it's because I know what kind of tricks they were pulling on us, I felt that it was a little bit overdone, not wrongly done, simply a little bit too in my face. I'm gonna be frank, but it wasn't wrong, because I would like the sound of the guitars, particularly that kind of solo that it was playing alongside the vocals quite nicely, to have a little bit more prominence. Also, we got plenty of great performances out of the bass and the drums that kind of went a little bit way to the backdrop, and overshadowed by the overabundance of volume of the vocals. I don't have any issues with the vocal line. I think it works. I simply think that it was a little bit too much of it, but that's a matter of opinion. What do you think? And what do you think about this track and this album? It's almost a tradition now in this channel, because we're getting close to covering the entirety of it, and it would be nice to see which one would be the next one, because, well, this album is extremely maligned, but in reality, little by little, I can see that more people discovers the beauty of this album, and how we missed many things, because I was among those fans who hated it when it got released. But later on, I gave it a second spin, and I started to enjoy it for what it is. Does it sound like Guns N' Roses? This is the closest, I think. But is it a Guns N' Roses album? Yes, but from 2007. It's not Guns N' Roses from the 90s, that's a fact. But tell me, what do you think? And of course, as I said before, tell me which would be the next track from this album to analyze together, because, yeah, the whole point is now to cover the entire thing, and then maybe throw a party or something. We will see what we do once we finish it off. So, yeah, if you like to support this kind of content, the best way to do it is by listening to our music on Apple Music or Spotify, which kind of has a little bit of Guns N' Roses on it. I'm not going to tell you that it's super similar to it, but yeah, I love Guns N' Roses, so maybe you will find some of those influences there. And also, you can follow us on social media such as Instagram and X, because that's the best way for you to get in touch with us on a much more personal basis. Now, girls and boys, as every single time I meet you, I can remind you that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about. Remember that I will see you when I see you.